Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, or today actually, for EcoQuestions. This is being recorded and we ask that everyone remain muted until it's time for the Q&A. So feel free to type questions into the chat at any time. Everyone who's registered for this session will receive the recording in their email, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel. For those of you who are not familiar with the Metro Phoenix Ecoflora, we are a community science project that is documenting urban biodiversity using a free web-based platform and app called iNaturalist. So every month, in addition to the overall project, we host a new EcoQuest challenge and EcoQuestion sessions like this one today. Our presentations focused on the EcoQuest topic of the month. So June is National Pollinator Month, and June 21st through 27th is International Pollinator Week. Since we don't see as much pollinator activity here in the Sonoran Desert this month, and it's brutally hot, we decided to celebrate with nocturnal pollinators. Our June EcoQuest, the night shift, is focused on documenting nocturnal pollinators and the plants that they visit. So in coordination with this theme, we have wildlife biologist Jess White here with us to tell us all about bats. Welcome, Jess, and I'll play your slides.
All right, thank you. So, are the slides working now? There we go. Okay, so a little bit about me, my background. I am a wildlife biologist. I went to school at the University of Delaware thinking I wanted to become a veterinarian, and then I took a wildlife conservation class and I realized, whoa, this is it. So I got a minor in that, and then I took some internships, and eventually I found my way to Arizona, where I am currently working on the barium goldwater range, working with the Sonoran Pronghorn, which is an endangered subspecies of pronghorn. And basically my job is to mitigate any take, because it is an endangered species. We want to make sure military activities aren't negatively impacting them as much as humanly possible. And so that's what I do for a living. But what I'm really passionate about, more than I'm going to be low key for the most part during this presentation, because I don't want to be like, bats, but I love bats. I think they're just absolutely magical and just so valuable from an ecological perspective, so cute, which I know as a wildlife biologist, you want to be as objective as possible, but they are adorable, truly. And knowing that they're maligned as they are, I think it's getting better. But I think it gets better in part because of presentations like this, where people have an opportunity to see how valuable bats are and just like the pressures that are put on them and reasons why they're under conservation scrutiny, because a lot of times bats are of conservation need. They're actually one of the most rapidly declining mammalian orders. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me. If you wouldn't mind switching the slide and doing the poll for me, please.
All right, poll 1 is live, and the question is, what brings you here today? And this is anonymous. I'll give a few seconds. We've got 50% vote. You don't have to vote if you don't feel comfortable. Give it a little bit more time. We've got 6 out of 10. Okay. And
awesome.
There's the results. Jess, can you see the results?
I can, yeah.
Okay.
And I appreciate somebody being honest, like just saying bats aren't necessarily their thing. Hopefully they are after this, but yeah, it seems like I see a lot of the people on here and I recognize them, such as Tiffany, who is a bat superstar. In fact, she was one of the largest roles actually in teaching me about the mist netting that I'll be speaking about in a couple of minutes. So feel free to tap in at any time if I say something incorrect, which I will admit. I hope not. I did a lot of research, but
All
yeah.
right.
And if you
Tiffany says, stop, you're making me blush in the chat. Are we ready for poll 2?
Thank you.
Okay. And poll 2 is live. How much do you know about local bats? And local, I assume we're talking Sonoran Desert.
Yes. Or Arizona, but yes.
Kathy said her other answer to the first poll is because Jess is awesome.
Thanks. Now you're making me blush. Blushing everywhere.
We're at 60% for votes. This one is also anonymous. Get a few more seconds. All right. And here are the results.
Okay, awesome. That's great that half the people here know quite a bit about bats. So hopefully this will just be a recap of what you are. I'm sure it will be. Okay.
I hope that doesn't make you more nervous.
Yes and no. As soon as I saw Tiffany, okay, all right, this is how this is going. But yeah, anyway, so I didn't have any background with bats prior to coming to Arizona, and the real way that I kind of jumped in 2 feet is with the mist netting with Arizona Game and Fish, which, like I said, Tiffany was one of the ones who took me under her wing and actually was the one to show me how to take bats out of what's called a mist net. So this picture is actually from one of those events. And so you can see that the mist net is a very thin mesh in which the bats will fly, but they can't really see it because it is so thin and it's strung across corridors. And so theoretically, that creates a pathway in which the bat can fly into the net. And then we quickly take it out using usually crochet hooks, actually, and our fingers, depending on the severity of how tangled it is. And so we'll take them out of these mist nets, and the program with Arizona Game and Fish and the Watchable Wildlife program is twofold. So it is both community science in that it gets a lot of information on bat communities, particularly, I believe, in the northeastern part of the valley, so like Rio Verde, McDowell Conservancy. And so you get information such as body condition, the sex of the animals, and whether or not they're juvenile, which I can show you in the next picture, where I'm pretty sure you're able to find that, but somebody might have to jump in to make sure I'm right on my game. But also wingspan, whether or not they're lactating, which can prove kind of the recruitment or be an indicating factor rather of the recruitment, or how many bats are reproductive and have babies. And so also, though, it's an opportunity to show people kind of how the process is done. So it's a Watchable Wildlife program. So people are able to come to these events and they're able to see the bats up close, obviously not too close because you do have to have rabies vaccinations, all 3 of them, in order to handle them, which Arizona Game and Fish was kind enough to get me those vaccines as a result of volunteering with them, which is absolutely invaluable to me, even though I haven't been able to use it thanks to COVID and the zoonotic potential of COVID. And we obviously don't want to get bats sick because there's already so many conservation issues surrounding bats and diseases such as white nose. But yeah, so if you could go to the next slide, I can show you kind of where the, so I believe it's right around the elbow. And Tiffany, correct me if I'm wrong, there's like a little keyhole where in juveniles it hasn't fully fused, I believe. And so when you shine a light behind the wing, you're able to see like a keyhole of light shining through, and that indicates to you that this is a juvenile as opposed to an adult. And another interesting feature of the anatomy here is that you can see firsthand the analogous features of a bat compared to us. They are mammals just like we are. They're the only flying mammals. There are other mammals, of course, that are called like flying squirrels, but they don't actually fly in the way that bats do. They're more of a gliding motion. But you can see how there's an elbow and a thumb, and then the radiating fingers, which go into the wing. And so effectively, their wing is kind of like a hand, which is really interesting to see kind of how we compare and how a lot of our anatomy is reflected in the anatomy of the bat too, in different functionality, of course. But if you could go to that next one, and let me see if, she didn't correct me, so hopefully I'm right there. But the first one I wanted to talk about was the lesser longnose bat, which is no longer federally listed as endangered, which is awesome. I believe it's considered threatened now. I don't know if that delineation has gone even further down, but it was for a long time considered an endangered species. As from 1988, it was listed because there were about 1,000 bats left that they were able to find in 14 roosting sites. And so this is actually kind of one of those great, oh, it's delisted completely. Yes, that's awesome. So this is one of those great stories to talk about of success in the Endangered Species Act, because it went from 1,000 individuals to over 200,000, and it was delisted in 2018 is my understanding. And so just that, I mean, that's a 200-fold increase in the span of about 30 years, which is incredible. I mean, the Sonoran Pronghorn that I work with, for example, has been listed since 1967, and we certainly haven't seen those kind of numbers of increase. So I really love hearing stories like that, and I hope that you guys get as just absolutely amped about it as I do. But yeah, so another interesting feature of the lesser longnose bat is that it's one of 2 species that are nectar feeding in the state of Arizona. So there are actually 28 species, to my knowledge, of bats in Arizona, and only 2 of those do feed on nectar. This one, and I believe the Mexican long-tongued bat, are the ones that feed on nectar. And so it feeds predominantly from columnar cacti such as the saguaro or organ pipe cacti, and I think there's one that starts with a C, whose name eludes me at the moment, but they also feed on agave. And so actually there are initiatives predominantly in Mexico currently to have bat-friendly tequila. So because they're harvesting agave, they're not necessarily allowing it to get to flowering. And so they're taking away a necessary food source for the lesser longnose bat. And so certain tequilas have different delineations for bat friendliness, which I think you guys actually recently posted an article about, which is awesome. But that creates the food, and they do it in an ecologically responsible way to where they're leaving some so that there's always corridors of this food so that as they're migrating, they're not coming across areas where they're not able to get nutrients. And actually back to the delisting thing. So where was it? Mexico delisted in 2015, and there are 75 roosts now, but that also kind of shows why they're so vulnerable and why they had gotten to such a low population, because 200,000 bats are spread into only 75 roosting sites. And so they have very conspicuous roosting sites that could become potentially harmed by human activity, either by actively maligning the bats because they see the bats and they're like, well, let's get rid of these, or just incidentally through habitat destruction. And so that's something that we're always mindful of, and they are still under scrutiny, I believe, to make sure that we never get to a point where the population starts to decline because of our actions. So yeah, to the next slide, please. All right, my personal favorite, the Pallid Bat. I know I shouldn't have favorites. It's like having favorite child. You're not supposed to, but they're just, I love Pallid Bats. Look at that face. At the end of the presentation, I have another picture from one of the Miss Knitting events too, and it fills my spirit with joy. But so Pallid Bats are actually a ground feeding insectivorous bat. And so you can see how large their ears are. That makes them more readily able to hear their prey walking along the ground. Adaptations. So they are, and an interesting adaptation for them is that they are largely immune to the venom of scorpions. So scorpions are a large part of their diet, whereas I don't know of any other bats that necessarily focus on scorpions. So that's kind of interesting. So for those of you who may not like scorpions, don't tell me, because I think they're valuable too. But Pallid Bats provide an enormous ecological service in keeping those numbers lower. And then they create small maternity colonies, which is kind of interesting because when you think of bats, you generally think of large roosting colonies, but they have about 20 to 100 bats in a maternity colony. I think the largest one ever seen was 163 individuals, as opposed to thousands in different species of bats that you might see. And so they're also highly social. And so these kind of contribute to their conservation status. They're not currently of concern, they're least concern. So even though they make small maternity colonies, they are one of the few bats who more often than not will have twins. Generally, bats will have 1 to 2 young every year. And so that's a contributing factor too as to why bats are of such conservation need, is that they just, even without the pressure of human habitat encroachment, et cetera, disease, they aren't able to reproduce rapidly enough to kind of counteract that a lot of times. But luckily, the pallid bat is not one of them that is under scrutiny at the moment. But activities like the Arizona Game and Fish mist netting events are imperative because they give us both a baseline. So you see where it was kind of at back when they initially started, which I think was 20 years ago, maybe more. And you can see how the population is fluctuating so that you can take active steps to mitigate it in the event that those populations are declining. And then if you could go to the next one, please. Okay, so the California leaf-nosed bat, which, while not my favorite, also has a special place in my heart because this is actually a picture of me holding one. That was the first bat I ever took out of a net. I lost my mind, as you saw in the first picture, where my jaw was practically unhinged because of my excitement. But California leaf-nosed bats are really interesting species. So they, like the pallid bat, have a tendency to eat ground-dwelling insects, although they can catch insects in flight too. But they are also one of the few bats known to eat caterpillars in North America, which I thought was really interesting. And they have a pretty small range. So they're relegated almost entirely to the Sonoran Desert and south of the Mogollon Rim. So that gives them a pretty small area in which to proliferate. And but as a result, they have really incredible arid adaptations. So in a lab study, they were able to go over 6 weeks without ever drinking water. And I don't believe anyone has ever anecdotally seen them drinking water. So they get all of their water content from the food that they're eating, which in this environment is pretty necessary. But this is a bat that is of conservation status, and I'm going to look at my notes because there's quite a few of them. It is a federal species of concern, and Arizona Game and Fish Wildlife of Special Concern, Forest Service sensitive, and ranked by the Western Bat Working Group as red or high. So that delineation is given to species that are imperiled or at high risk of imperilment, and the Western Bat Working Group recommends these species be given highest priority for funding, planning, and conservation actions. And another contributing factor and something interesting that I learned about them is that their gestation period is actually 8 months, which is almost a human's gestation period. And again, they have so few young that if their gestation period is that long, in the event that something happens, and for example, they aren't able to mate, or they do mate, but the sperm doesn't work out like it does in the Western Pipistrelle, which I'll talk about shortly, that's a huge detriment to them, because that's 1 year where they're not able to have their 1 or 2 young, and they're already they have such a high gestation rate that, or time frame. It's crazy to me. Like I had no idea that any bats had one that long. And in fact, most of them seem to have it between 1 month and 2 months. So this is proportionally much bigger of a gestation period than any other one that I had researched in this, which admittedly was only a fair few because I didn't want to overwhelm you guys with all the bats and I don't have time to ramble about them. But and so I think that's all I have for that one. Yes. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, the Western Pipistrelle, I believe their gestation period was 30 to 40 days or something. But one of the interesting things about this one is that this was usually the harbinger of bat activities for the night. So anytime you saw Western Pipistrelle for the night, it was generally the first to come out to start actively seeking insects. Then you knew, okay, it's go time. And so at that point, we would undo our mist nets because we tie them up in the event that we're not using them because we don't want any incidental animals to fly into it, such as burrowing owls or different birds. And so at that point, once you see the Western Pipistrelle first, you will pull down the net, and then that's the start of the night. So kind of has a special value to me in that regard too. But they are so small that they tend to have a pretty high water dependency, higher than a lot of other bats. So they keep their maternity roost, generally speaking, near a body of water. And in Arizona, that's such a hot commodity that may limit the range that they have. But luckily, their range is more spread out throughout the United States, so that's not as much of an issue. And as such, they're not considered of a threat at the moment. Luckily, hopefully they maintain that. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of water. But the interesting thing about them is that they will mate in the fall, but if for some reason they're roused from hibernation, which may not be an issue in southern Arizona, for example, but in different areas of the United States where they do go into hibernation, if they're roused from that hibernation, the sperm could potentially become useless. And so this bat sometimes has a spring mating event to try to counteract that. But I mean, that's obviously negative as well, because the best case scenario is mating in the fall. And the interesting thing is that most of the bat species I was looking at, they don't start gestation. The females will actually store the sperm somehow anatomically. I didn't look that deeply into it. And then they will merge the two in the spring. And so if the sperm that she had collected in the fall is now not useful, then she'll have to mate in the spring. And that also creates different energetic pressures because it takes energy in order to mate. And you have to find a male, for example, whereas it might not be as readily found in the spring as it is in the fall. And so that's just an interesting thing in their conservation status and why they're not of concern now, but they're definitely being looked at pretty hard to make sure that they don't go into a state where that becomes an issue. Okay, and then if you could go to the next one, please. Oh, my cat is joining me. Sorry, guys. Excuse me. No, thank you. Later. So this is the Western yellow bat. And they actually prefer riparian areas with a lot of trees like cottonwood and palms, actually, interestingly enough. And so, again, this is another issue of having limited localities in which there is actively riparian environment. And so they're also generally solitary, which goes hand in hand with them liking palms, in that something that you can do actively, if you have palms in your yard, the palm fronds that die and they'll hang there can actually be a good roosting site for the Western yellow bat. And so if you don't trim those, that could be beneficial. And so that's something to keep in mind too. And then they are migratory, but because they like the riparian areas, they have to have corridors that are close enough to water because they're pretty dependent upon that. And so in the event that we have so much evaporation that some of these local areas in which the water availability was previous and it becomes less, this could again be a pressure against their conservation, although currently I believe that they are least concerned. Yes. Flutter me. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Okay, so some considerations of bats, and a lot of you said that you know a lot about bats, so this is going to be pretty much a reiteration of what you already know, but they are enormously ecologically beneficial. Sometimes it's easy to put a number on things to give people context. So bats create billions of dollars of insect control value in any given year. And so, for example, there's a certain moth that is a vector of a disease to cotton plants. And so the Mexican free-tailed bat is a huge predator of those. And so, for example, in Arizona, having a huge population of that, which we don't compared to Texas, for example, but that would be awesome, right? Because we have cotton as one of the C's of our general crops. And so that alone is awesome, but also there's health considerations from a human perspective. So I'm from the East Coast, and West Nile virus is like a pretty big deal. And so bats obviously eat a ton of mosquitoes as well. They can eat up to their weight in insects in any given night, sometimes depending on the species. And so just imagine the biomass of mosquitoes that they're getting rid of. And as a result, they're lessening the vector potential of mosquitoes for diseases like West Nile virus, or in other parts of the world, malaria, etc. So that's huge. I mean, even if you don't think of them as being worthwhile just simply for the fact that they exist in this world, which I of course do because I love them, they provide so much value to us from a financial perspective as well, and a human safety and health perspective. And then, so some concerns for bats is that they are, like I said before, they're the most quickly declining land mammal. And they have a large vulnerability at roosting spots. So because they generally roost together, that gives opportunities for, if there was disease such as white nose, which isn't as big of a problem in Arizona as it is elsewhere, but I think there is still some cases, and again, Tiffany, correct me if I'm wrong, in Arizona, and that could again increase. It's generally a problem in colder areas because, or I guess it's almost wholly a problem in cold areas because it wakes the bats up from their hibernation, and so they get out of that phase of low energetic needs, and then they burn through their energy, and then they can't keep themselves warm in the winter anymore, and that's actually how the fungus ends up killing them, to my understanding. But they have the higher disease potential, and if somebody decided to hurt them for whatever reason, they're in this concentrated area and you could wipe out a much larger portion of them. But also mines are a large area where roosting happens, and so if a mine is either reinstated, that gets rid of that habitat that they're already using so that the human activity can continue, or if they're closed and they're closed in such a way that gates aren't put in front of it, again, that's however many in that area, depending on the species, are now compromised. So that's a big deal. And then, as I said before too, they have a slow reproductive rate. So even without the ecological pressures of, or rather anthropomorphic pressures of all the things that we're doing to jeopardize them, they themselves can't really come back from the brink as readily as other animals do because they have such a slow reproductive rate of 1 to 2 on average in a given year. And then for humans, there's always the consideration, of course, of bats have rabies, and some of them do. I think the generally accepted rate of rabies prevalence in bats is about 1%, which relative to the hype that people create for bats, people are like, oh, all bats are rabid. Not the case, obviously. 1% is a really low percentage, higher than some other species, yes. But as a result, you don't really want to handle bats. And that's true of all wildlife, really. Like, you want to leave wildlife wild, but particularly with bats, because there can be that health concern, and you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're creating more bad press for bats, you know, like even, I mean, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you could get rabies. So for example, in the event that you're finding a bat and it's on the ground, that's not a good sign. That's very counterintuitive to their normal behavior, and rabies tends to manifest in abnormal behaviors. And so if you find a bat on the ground, you don't want to touch it. Like you want to call Liberty Wildlife, you want to call Arizona Game and Fish, you want to call somebody who's a professional to give you advice on how to best proceed, but you don't want to handle it with your bare hands. You want to bring any animals or children away, anyone who could accidentally touch the animal. And so if you did get bitten, for example, you'd want to capture that animal so that it can get rabies testing. But anyways, another human consideration for bat safety is that cats are actually a huge ecological problem for a great many species, such as native bird species, but also for bats, which I never thought about until doing some of this research. And they are one of the main predators for a great many bat species. And so if you keep your cats outdoors, my PSA is to bring your cats indoors for the sake of wildlife. And then the last one is to, leave them alone. Like, you observe them, they're incredible animals. Like, if you're given an opportunity where you can see them and they're roosting in your palm tree, for example, like the Western yellow bat, like that to me is a great honor, but don't disrupt them. Just let them live their lives. As long as they're not in your space inside, for example, they shouldn't be a threat to you at all. as long as they're not on the ground either. But if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide then. I think these three are just, so there's a Bats of Arizona poster by Arizona Game and Fish, and I can provide that link too if you want. But I found this really descriptive because certain links that I had used for research don't show the same bats, but this one shows all 28 species of native Arizona bats. And so the next three slides actually show them. Look how magical they are. Like, just even from like an anatomical perspective, they are so streamlined, and I love bats. But so I think the last slide is just leading up into any questions that anybody might have. And oh, and this is the Pallid Bat picture that I just love. They're so saucy. Look at that face. I love Pallid Bats. And thank you guys for bearing with me being like that Kristen Bell level of like, like when she sees the sloth. I just love bats. I think they're the best. So, but yes, thank you for listening to me speak. And if you guys have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Jess. I also am a huge fan of bats, and I had an opportunity to go bat netting with
Did you?
with Game and Fish. It was absolutely amazing. So we're going to move into Q&A, and we do have one in the chat, and I think we kind of touched on this individually, but in a more general sense, I guess, why are bats so threatened?
Okay. I think I saw that pop up too, specifically during the California leaf-nosed bat. So I can touch on that too. But yeah, bats are threatened because there's a lot of infringement upon their habitat by human developments, for one. So their habitats are growing smaller, and that gives them less space in which to roost. And so that also creates an urban interface where they might have to roost on your roof, for example, because they don't have as many readily accessible areas. And that's detrimental to them too, because a lot of people don't like bats. They see bats and like, rabies, and they might like hit it with a broom, hurt them. That's not great. There's a lot of disease concern, particularly around white nose disease. It is enormously detrimental to bat populations. And I think there's some concerns of researchers might have at the beginning things when they were doing the research, not thinking about the magnitude of it. They may have introduced it to different caves. And so that's a big thing in the caving community too, like spelunking, is that you need to studiously wash your equipment anytime you're switching caves, because you can easily transmit it between caves. And like I was talking about before, that creates, they wake up during hibernation, and then they blast through their resources, like their fatty deposits, and then they can't survive long enough to get through the winter to the warmer months. And so they die that way. And if anybody knows more about it than me, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding. But we spray a lot of insecticides too, so we get rid of their prey. Not all bats are insectivorous, of course, but and there are many studies that show our insect populations have declined enormously as well. And so with prey decline comes predator decline. And then even the frugivorous bats, so bats that eat fruit, or bats like the lesser long-nosed bat actually eats fruit in addition to eating nectar, and is a huge seed dispersal of saguaros. Near the border, for example, we're getting rid of a lot of saguaros, and so we're taking away these corridors of their food, even if insect isn't what they're surviving on, right? So there's all these pressures that together create a huge decline in their populations. And then for the California leaf nose one specifically, I think it has a lot to do with the small range and the long gestation period. I'm sure there are more pressures in that, but those are the ones that I came across when I was doing my research.
Thank you. And definitely habitat loss for sure, I think is a big deal for them. Like you said, especially because they tend to be in such big groups together, or like you said, palm trees. That was something I didn't know. So, we see so many palm trees get trimmed to those 3 goofy little fronds at the top. And A, how do you expect them to photosynthesize that way? But B, as roosting sites, that's great to know. So another question we have, does planting non-native agave in our area cause any issues for nectar migrating bats, such as like blue agave?
Right. I don't know what the utilization rate is for non-natives, but for me, I would say obviously native planting is always preferred because even if they're getting nectar from that, which I don't know is the case, it's probably not the same quality. Like there are some instances where non-natives, as I understand, like for example, pollinator species, lantana is non-native, but somebody was telling me that that gives sometimes more nectar than others to different pollinator species. I don't know if I believe it, but I would say that generally, or like as a rule, yes, that is probably detrimentally impacting them. Is that better than nothing? Likely, but it might not be the same quality, just like how some of the lesser long-nosed bats may drink from hummingbird feeders. Um, there's something called an ecological trap phenomenon where you're creating this available resource and it's okay, it's better than nothing, but they become dependent upon it because they know that that's consistent, whereas other resources might not be consistent given the heat or whatever myriad of things that are creating this inconsistency in their food availability. And so they're eating that, but nutritionally it is not the same as their usual food source. And so I imagine there's a similar phenomenon between these non-native agaves and the native agaves. But don't quote me on that one. I'll have to do some more research.
We don't have a published journal to back that one up.
Right.
I think, it's always an interesting analogy. I've heard that before, and comparing it to like junk food, right? If we
Mhm.
have access to junk food, we're going to eat that, right? Versus, but as humans, we kind of know better. But if something tastes good or attracts them more, they can get locked into that.
Mhm.
Another question we have: what do you think about bat boxes, and what are the best places to put them in a phoenix home?
I don't know much about bat boxes from a Phoenix perspective. It's a lot easier to put them elsewhere in the country because we don't just have such awfully hot temperatures. I know that you can cook bats in a bat box in Phoenix if it's put in the wrong place. I think if you had an appropriate microclimate that you had created and you could put it at the right angle, because there's specific angles that you're supposed to put the boxes, if I'm not mistaken, then maybe um, I would have to do more research on that too to say definitively, because I don't want to put you in a situation where you think you're helping bats because of my word, but in reality, it's too hot for it to be actually sustainable living for them. And if anybody, again, knows more about that, please feel free to jump in.
Thank you. I had no clue that it could get too hot for them, but that makes complete sense here. And I think, yeah, don't quote me, but I think it's a north facing, possibly, in an alcove or something like that. I was looking at this not too long ago. Kathy also says in the chat, make sure the bat house is BatCon approved, as some of them are not built right, like many of them that are available on Amazon. So just be cautious about what you're getting. Kathy has also put some great community science initiatives and links in the chat. Roger asked, using a sophisticated bat detector, can one identify individual species? And Kathy put one of the things that I think is really cool, which is one that just pops into your cell phone and you can actually use that, which is cool. So would you want to talk about that a little bit?
I think that yes, there are some pretty sensitive ones that can identify the different calls, and so they can separate the frequency and then they can relate it to the frequency that they have heard often enough to say, like, this is this bat call. And so like sauna bat, for example, is I think prohibitively expensive for it, just like a bat enthusiast maybe, but a lot of researchers will use that to identify calls. And I don't know the effectiveness of the phone one, but I've heard a bunch of people speak really enthusiastically about it. So I think that from just like a backyard perspective, that's a great resource.
All right. If anyone has a question they'd like to ask verbally, you can raise your hand or type your name in the chat. I'm going to ask really quickly, are bats really blind?
They are not. No. So I think bats are generally considered to have similar eyesight to us. They can see in night conditions as well. They don't have incredible vision, but they are certainly not blind, and they tend to use their eyesight in addition to echolocation. It's not exclusively echolocation though for any bat that I know of.
All right. Does anyone want to unmute themselves and ask a question? I'll give a couple of seconds. Don't see anything. All right. So I know you gave us a lot today, but what's at least one of your top 3 favorite bat facts?
Oh, let me look through my notes. I feel like there was you know what? Actually, I think the weird like it's crazy to me that they mate in the fall, but they don't like combine gametes to start the gestation process until the spring. I had no idea. I'd never heard of that anywhere. And so hearing that or reading it rather, I was like, bats are so cool. Like that's such a smart adaptation so that they can have their babies at the appropriate time if their gestation period is so short or long, depending on the bat. So I think that's really neat. Which is totally a weird answer, right? Like
I think it's a good one. It's an amazing adaptation. It's just
such a science nerd one.
yeah. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, and I'm gonna pop some links in the chat for everyone really quick, just to the EcoFlora program itself, our EcoQuest, and then our other events for June. So you can check those out while we're talking in the last few minutes. But we kind of touched on disease a little bit, and when it comes to kind of human interaction. And I think a lot of people, especially given, the pandemic that we're in, there was a lot of blame on bats and there's a lot of, but I think that has to do a lot with habitat encroachment, right? Like we see when we get that interaction and we're getting close to bats, but like in reality, what is the real risk of getting a disease from a bat?
Really, really small. Like I said, only it's established that like they expect 1% of bats to have rabies. So if you came across 100 bats, which I don't know why you would, because I have never in my life been outside and come into contact with a bat outside of these community science initiatives, right? So why, I'm so sorry, my cat, no personal space. Why would you be coming into contact with them? So in reality, if you're not touching them, you're not going to have any risks. And if you are, you still have a low risk, but that doesn't mean you should by any means. And yes, like with COVID and the like theoretically accepted them being a vector or that being the source, if we weren't interfacing with these animals, like I think it was a wet market, right? That this was thought to have initiated from. I know there's some contention in the news at the moment as to whether or not that's the case, but that if we weren't interfacing with them and encroaching upon them and doing whatever with them, that wouldn't be an issue because they're not coming to us. Bats don't want to be in our space. If they do, it's only because maybe bat or insects are hanging out at our light, right? They want to be living exclusive to our population, and so it's us moving into their space, not them moving into ours. So I would say very low. And if we weren't trying to encroach in their space, it exponentially lower because the only time you would be coming into contact with them in that context would be if there was one on the ground and maybe somebody wasn't thinking, they're like, oh, this bat needs help, and they touch it with their bare hands, which you never want to do. So
Yeah, and I think there's been this kind of, old Hollywood stereotype of bats wanting to get in your hair and attack you and that kind of thing. But which is totally inaccurate. They're not coming after you. They don't seek out humans to. And there is some concern with vampire bats. I think that was something that, even as a kid, I was like, what do you mean? They want to drink my blood? But really again, it's that, habitat encroachment and where you have that human wildlife interface and that kind of thing. So we have one question in the chat, and then for those of you who just joined us, if you would like to put your questions in the chat or unmute and ask a question, you're welcome to. The question in the chat is, what variety of bat do I see sweeping down near our pool in the evening?
oh, I'm trying to think. There was one specifically that they were talking about how they need to have a long stretch enough that they can swoop because they can't like just land by the water and drink. They have to get it in motion. I want to say that it was either the Western Pipistrelle or the Western yellow bat, but it could be that a great many species do that. I just remember, I think one of those explicitly is one of the ones that you would see. And depending on the time of night, if it's like early dusk, that could very well be a Western Pipistrelle since they're one of the first bats to emerge for the evening.
Kathy put in the chat a side note, put a little ramp in your pool in case bats fall in so they can get out. And I think that's true for different wildlife species, it's always a good idea to have some route of escape for wildlife. Does anyone want to unmute and ask a question? We'll give a couple of seconds. Kathy said frogs, turtles, etc. Yep, need those too. A couple more seconds if anyone wants to ask questions, and then we'll finish up. All right, I think that's it. Well, Jess, thank you again so very much. So great to hear from you, and your enthusiasm, like I said, is super contagious, and it's great to see that enthusiasm for bats and share that, and hopefully it's contagious.
I hope so.
Place those links in the chat again for more information about EcoFlora and our EcoQuests. We have one more virtual event with Dr. Katie Prudick from the University of Arizona, and 2 in-person events, including this Wednesday. We'll be going to the Phoenix Bat Cave, which technically isn't a cave, but they're there. So we'll be doing that this Wednesday at 7:15 if you'd like to join us. And then we also are going to do moth lighting at the end of the month. So if you aren't already, follow us on social at EcoFloraPHX. We'll be posting lots of great info about pollinators all month long. Thank you again for joining us. And if you would like to ask more questions or you think of something, please feel free to email us, and we'll get your questions to Jess. Thanks again. Thank you, Jess. Everyone's saying thank you in the chat. You have any closing remarks?
I just go out and spread the good word about how wonderful bats are and how important they are, and hopefully if one person can convince one other person, and I'm hoping that there's not so many people to convince nowadays, but if one person can convince one other person about how majestic they are and how valuable they are, then one day we'll get to a point where people understand and appreciate the value of bats rather than thinking that, oh, bats. And so that's the goal.
Spread the bat gospel.
Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you so
yeah,
much too.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining us, and have a great rest of the day.